YA fantasy. It's a genre that people of all age groups read. Why am I so excited to talk about it today? Because we are going to be ranking my favorite YA fantasy books today. Why did I choose 20? Well, apparently off the top of my head, I think I only read 20 books, but when I say books, I'm also saying that as a part of a series. So if you have 3 books within a series, I'm just putting that as one. In other words, I am ranking them as series and not just standalone books. And I would like to emphasize that because I will be saying a lot of things that might stir up some controversy, because one of the books of a series can be a 5-star read for me, and then the second book or third book or whatever was a DNF. And let's just say that there was a number of series that happened. And unfortunately, they were very popular books. So let's see if you guys agree with me or if you think I am absolutely crazy. Let's start off with number 20 with The Beautiful. Now again, I am talking about not just one book, I'm actually talking about both books, and I believe there's a third one that's coming out or has come out, I'm not sure. Why is this number 20? The Beautiful was a solid 4-star read for me. I enjoyed it. I got this in a fairy loot box when it came out. I think it was like October, which was appropriate for Halloween, and I read it during the October season. So I think it was exactly 3 years ago when I read The Beautiful. I really liked it. We have vampires. We're in the late 1800s, I believe it was, in New Orleans. It was a nice read. I enjoyed it, especially for the spooky season. It was great. It took a little time for me to get into it, and I'll be honest, I don't remember exactly what the plot was because it's been 3 years. I didn't reread it because it didn't stand out to me. So I think it ended in a cliffhanger. Well, no, I remember. It did end in a cliffhanger. So when I found out the second book was coming out, believe me, I was first in line to buy it. And of course I wanted to buy a matching set, which just was the sprayed edges, the black cover, etc. I barely got through the first 100 pages of this book. I really disliked the direction of the story. The introduction of so many mythical creatures, it just overwhelmed me. I thought it was gonna be just, a vampire story, vampire love story, something that kind of reminds you of Twilight, maybe. But it just completely overwhelmed me. The male character, I don't remember his name. I didn't love him a lot in the first book. He was okay, but I despised him in the second book. He gave off that fratty boy vibes, and I don't know, this book it just didn't do it for me. It's at the bottom of my list at number 20. At number 19, we have An Enchantment of Ravens. This book is a standalone book. I think I gave it was like a 3.5 or maybe a 4-star read. It's a perfect autumn read. I would still recommend this book to people. It didn't wow me. It was a quick-paced read. The book was very predictable, basically. It wasn't like I was hungry to finish this book, but it was still enjoyable. We have a lot of books to go through, so I'm just speeding along. Number 18, we have A Curse So Dark and Lonely. I'm surprised that I put it at place 18 because the first book, this book, was, I guess you can say a favorite read of mine. I'm a huge fan of Beauty and the Beast retellings, which is why I bought this book in the first place, and I very much enjoyed it. I really did. When the second book came out, A Heart So Fierce and Broken, of course I was excited for it, I wanted to read it. We started focusing on the character of Gray. I really liked him in the first book, but let's just say that they turned the original 2 characters, their names are escaping me at the moment, but they turned them into jerks, I would say. I was reading them and I'm like, why are they so sassy towards everyone? I don't know. I wasn't the biggest fan, but it's okay. The thing that bothered me the most is it took me the longest time to read it. Why? I did want to DNF it. I was tempted to many times. There's around 450 pages in this book, okay? I would say that only until page maybe 300, 325, something like that, was when things started to pick up. Like I said, I wanted to DNF this book many times. I was so bored. The plot was not there. It was very lacking compared to the first book. But in reality, it really was boring for me. Only until the very end of the book, the last maybe 100 pages, I was like, oh, okay, things are picking up. I'm okay with this. Overall, I gave this book 3 stars because I was gonna give it 2 stars, but just the ending I did like, so I gave it that extra star. The third book, that book came out a good while ago, and I'm not in any rush to buy it. I know that it's still centered on Gray, but I don't think I'm gonna be reading that book. Leave a comment down below. Do you think I should still give it a chance, or do you think it's not worth it? Because a number of people did tell me that the second book was not their favorite, and many people did DNF it. So do you think I should give the third book a chance, or should I just wrap this series up and call it a day? We are now at number 17, which is Serpent and Dove. Again, I'm judging this as a series, not as a standalone book. This book was very cute. I think I gave it 4 stars when I read it a while back. I got this book a month after The Beautiful because it was in the November Fairy Loot box. So I got this book, I read it. I did enjoy it a lot. And of course, as you can see, following my train of thought, the second book came out. I got the second book, was excited to read it, and I had the same exact experience as I did with Cursed So Dark and Lonely. The book started off okay. It dragged a little for me to the point where I didn't want to finish the book, and I was really bored, very bored with this book. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna try to push through. So I did. I pushed through the book, and still, I think it took me maybe 2 or 3 months to read this. Frankly, I have no desire to read the third book. I did buy it, but I bought it right before I finished the second book. So I started reading it, I'm like, wait a second, before I start reading the second book, let me order the third one. I don't even know if I want to read this now. I do want to read it because I want to find out what happens in the end with her mom and that whole situation that's going on. But at the same time, I feel like I will read like this much of the book, which will be full of like fluff or getting ready for what's to come. And then the exciting part is the end. And it's like, I kind of don't want to read through so much fluff. Give me more plot-heavy stuff. But again, this is all of my opinion. At number 16, as we're climbing up this list, we have Incendiary. I don't have a lot of negative things to say about it. It's just, when I read it, it was to me, just like an average read. It wasn't fantastic, but at the same time, it's not like I hated it and didn't want to read it. I just read it and I was just very neutral with it. I probably wouldn't reread this, but I probably would invest in getting the second book to read. We are at number 15 with Ninth House. So this is more in the gray area of my rankings. It wasn't the most fantastic read I've ever read, but at the same time, like I said, I don't have much negative things to say about it. The plot to me was very unique, and I don't think I ever read anything like it, which is why I rated it slightly higher than the other books, for example. I had to reread a couple of the parts multiple times just to understand things, but that's not negative per se. Maybe it's just me as a person. Like, it takes me 100 times to reread a page to actually understand something, because computationally it might take a little longer for me. But all jokes aside, it was a very good book. I think I gave it also like a 4-star rating. This is one of the books where as soon as I finished it, I was like, you know what? I can't wait for the second book. I actually really want to read it. Moving on to number 14, we have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. The crazy thing is, I recommend this book to everyone. Anytime somebody asks me, hey, what book would you recommend for me? I've never read fantasy or YA or whatever. I just give them this book. The storyline was very unique to me. I don't believe I've read anything like this. I absolutely love when we have 2 different time periods. So one chapter was set in like the 1700s, and then the next chapter is set, you know, in the current time period. I really liked it. But for some odd reason, I haven't finished this book. I started reading this. I got this from Book of the Month, October 2020. That was when I chose it. I read it probably in the beginning of 2021. We are at the end of 2022, and I have yet to finish this book. I was devouring it. I don't know what page I got up to. I think I'm a good maybe like halfway through. I'm not gonna say anything to avoid spoilers. I got a good halfway through where the plot now twists because we found out something You know, I'm not gonna spoil it, but we found something out that's very important for the plot. And for some reason, I just stopped. I stopped and I just could not continue. I don't know why. I don't know if the plot twist kind of made me stop or I didn't want the book to end. Whatever it is, I have yet to finish this. Maybe I will eventually finish this and offer it a higher ranking, but as of right now, I'm gonna leave it at 14th place and keep it at that. We're almost at the halfway point and we're at number 13, which is Onyx and Ivory. I'm putting it into 13th place because A, I have yet to read the second book, which is Shadow and Flame. I would average these out. If this is really good, it probably would move up in my ranking. If it's really bad, I might drop it 1 or 2 spots. However, when I read this book, again, it was one of those books where it was a page turner for me. I just wanted to find out what was gonna happen next. What I was following more were the characters. And I don't usually just follow the characters. It's always like the characters accompany the plot. For me, I'm a plot-driven person. But this time, I was just focused on the characters and the character development. All in all, it's a very solid book. So I'm looking forward to reading Shadow and Flame. Why haven't I read it yet? Because I can't commit to a TBR. Coming in at 12th place, we have Cirque. I used to have a soft spot for Greek mythology and other mythologies. This was back in maybe like middle school, high school. I stopped for a while because I started reading more YA fantasy, NA fantasy, whatever, other fantasy books for a time. And then somebody recommended this book for me. At first I was very skeptical and thought I wouldn't really like it because I read the plot and I was like, okay, it's decent. Maybe I'll just put it on the back burner and pick it up some other time. Then I started reading it. I think I read the first 40 pages, 50 pages, and I was like, okay, this is okay. It's not the best. But then I kind of felt myself fall into the character's mind, watching this person's life from the very beginning to the end, and I couldn't stop myself from reading. So to anyone who has yet to read any Greek mythology or any other mythology and you want kind of like a gateway to it, I feel like this would be a great book to start with. Coming in at number 11 is Sorcery of Thorns. I can't emphasize how much I adore this book, and come to think of it, I feel like it's time for a reread. I read it probably like 2 years ago. As I held it up, I was thinking of how to really explain this book, but on the end, there's a author's appraisal, and even one thing here, it says, if you loved the Hogwarts library, you'll be right at home here. I feel like that fits the description of this book so much. It's full of sorcerers, you're in a library, there's magic. It's such a comforting read. It still has some kind of like twists that keep you at the edge of your seat, but at the same time, I feel like if you're looking for a more mellow read, this is the book for you. We're officially at the halfway mark with number 10. I don't physically own this book, but it's the Caraval series. This series, and again, I'm ranking this as a series, not as just individual books. If I were to rank it as individual books, I would say the story got better with every book. So you have the first one, the second, and the third. My absolute favorite one was the third. Caraval will always have a special place in my heart because after I took a break from reading, which took a couple of years, this was one of the first books that got me back into reading. The first book, Caraval, I think the beginning for me, like the first half of the book, I was like, oh, okay, it's probably gonna be a 3-star read. It's average. But you know, as you got towards the end, I kind of like sat up in my chair and I was like, okay, I'm kind of liking this. The second book was a lot more fun because this whole experience that the author created, this whole different like world, it was so fun to be in because like it was so confusing in the sense like when you go into maybe like a maze or in like those clown houses, whatever it is, it really like I didn't expect the next step. And then the third book was my absolute favorite one. Definitely go give that series a read. Speaking of books that got me back into reading after my reading gap, number 9, this doesn't have a title on top. Number 9, we have The Cruel Prince. I don't own the original book covers. I only bought the collector's edition, the special one from Fairy Loot, so I have these three. The reason being is I wanted it kind of like a reminder to myself. The Cruel Prince was that book that got me back into reading. It made me fall in love with YA fantasy all over again. Is this series the best I've ever read? No, it's definitely not. But with the sentiment, computational guys, the sentiment behind this book paired with good storytelling and good character development led me to put this at 9th place. Coming in at number 8 is a personal favorite of mine that I read, I think when I was in 8th grade or 9th grade, and it is called Grave Mercy. This is one of those books that I haven't seen like it hasn't been talked a lot on Book Talk, Bookstagram, etc. Maybe because it was published a long time ago. I'm trying to find the date on this. So this came out in 2012, so a solid 10 years ago. Maybe that's why it hasn't, been super popular. After I read this book, I promised myself that I would reread this every year around the time of my birthday, which is end of November. After maybe the 5th or 6th time, I kind of stopped liking it a lot, but I think it's due to the fact that I just kept rereading and rereading and rereading it. What did help was book 2 and 3 later came out, and they were in the perspectives of 2 separate characters. So let's just say there were 3 friends, and it was 3 separate stories that, was with all of those 3 friends. That helped me come back to loving this book a lot. But now, 10 years is a long time. And when you read something when you're in high school versus when you're reading it, like 10 years later, your perspective kind of changes. Overall, I feel like if I didn't read it like 100 freaking times, I think I still would appreciate it much more. Number 7, I don't think I need to explain too much, but number 7, we have the Twilight series. The book came out obviously a long time ago, and I personally started reading it when I was around 12 years old, I believe. I think I was 12. And right when I was finishing up the second book, Twilight the movie came out in theaters. The movies to me aren't the best, but again, I'm only focusing on the books themselves. We all had our mini obsession with Twilight. I convinced my brother at that time when he was little that I was a vampire, yada, yada, yada. But when it comes to being a vampire read, it is a higher ranking. Like, I did enjoy Twilight more than The Beautiful, for example. Number 6, we have Cruel Beauty. Like I mentioned before, I'm a huge fan of Beauty and the Beast and any retellings of the story. And this is like a nice dark twist to Beauty and the Beast, especially since it's an enemies to lovers, where she is betrothed to this evil prince. Since she was really young, she just wanted to kill him. Isn't that romantic? So those elements put together, plus I really loved the main character of the book. The love story aspect of it was very fun to see unravel from an enemies to lovers to, to lovers, hello. I think as a Beauty and the Beast retelling, I would highly recommend this book if anybody were to try to find some retellings. Definitely, it was a 5-star read for me. We have entered the realm of my top 5 favorite YA fantasy books of all time, or just what I have read so far. At number 5, we have The Shadows Between Us. This was one of the most fun reads ever. It's a standalone book. It's not even that big, so it was very fast-paced. But it wasn't so fast-paced where you're like tripping over and you're like, whoa, 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 slow down, what the heck is going on? It was so much fun because the main character's personality was so badass. He's this evil shadow king and she's trying to woo him, and the way she was doing it was so much fun. Her attempted murders was fun to, experience, and how he evaded them. And in the end, I'm not gonna spoil the ending if you haven't read it yet, but my goodness, if I'm ever in a major reading slump, you'll see me walking around with this book, because this will cure any book hangover, any reading slump. Number 4 is an older read. I think it's the oldest one from all of these series that I've been talking about today. It is called the Sweep series. It has a lot of books. I don't remember how many, but I know it's north of 8 or 9 books. So like this one book that you're looking at is actually composed of 3 separate ones. And they come in different collections. I only own the first 2, but these books, the first book rather, came out in 2001, or at least this collection of books came out in 2001. Not to give out too much information, but basically this series showed me what Wicca was, paganism, etc. Where in my mind, I thought witchcraft was just fantasy, it was just something that was just conjured up. But there's like a whole religion behind it. I remember doing so much research into it because I found it so interesting. But besides that, I found the main character, I think her name was Morgan, to be very relatable, and to see her grow as a person and as a witch. It wasn't magic that was like in your face, but of course I'm not gonna get into details because I don't want to spoil it for whoever wants to read it, but it has a very special place in my heart. It was one of the first fantasy books I ever read. The top 3 books was one of the most difficult things I ever had to ever do. If you go up to any book lover and you ask them, what's your favorite book of all time? It's extremely hard to answer because, you know, every book is different and you can have a favorite, this book in this genre, maybe this book for this reason. It's very hard to choose a favorite. So for me to rank things and to rank something number 1 basically is asking what was my favorite book. There are 3 favorites that I have, and to rank them was extremely difficult because I love each one of them for different reasons. And if you really think about it, these 3 books are very similar to each other. So coming in at number 3 is From Blood and Ash. This was a very hard decision because it really is one of my favorite series of all time. It was one of those books where, to me, it got better with every book. Again, the character development of our main character is, I believe, is fantastic. The story was catching me off guard all the time. At first, you think the author kind of like tries to reel you in thinking, hey, this is predictable. You know what's gonna happen, and you're reading and you're like, yeah, I know what's gonna happen, but whatever. And all of a sudden she was like, nope, the complete opposite happens, which is what I felt when I was reading this book, this whole series, especially the last book. The last book for me was top tier. But like I said, it was extremely difficult to put it in 3rd place because it was one of my favorite reads of all time. So the book that managed to top that one at number 2 is A Court of Thorns and Roses. Are you surprised that this is in the top? Obviously not. I speak about this book more than I speak about anything else. I will forever recommend this book to anyone. I don't care what you like. I don't care if all you read are murder mysteries or historical fictions. I'm giving you this book to read, okay? I am officially part of the inner circle. I don't care what you're talking about. I've read this series a couple of times already because this is my comfort read. This is it. You know how people have comfort foods that make them feel warm inside? This is it. This is it. I would argue and say of the entire series, my favorite, and I'm just talking about, oh gosh, this is a little difficult. So, because you have A Court of Silver Flames, which is in the perspective of a different character, but that's fine. I would say that one is my most favorite book, so A Court of Silver Flames. And then the second book was up there as well. They were basically tied for first place if you think about it. I really thought when I was thinking about this video and how I'm gonna do my rankings, I automatically thought, hey, this will be number 1 because it's like my favorite book of all time. Okay, so hear me out. Before I reveal what the first spot is, I would like to make a point that I did extensive research to see whether or not this is qualified as a YA book. This is hard, okay? Because the author mentioned that it's not YA, it's actually adult fantasy. Many professional reviewers and people who studied these books, a lot of them have said, no, this still qualifies as YA. We walk on a very thin line between YA, NA, which is new adult, and adult fantasy. And apparently this book is on the brink of being YA and NA. And I'm just talking, but I feel like at this point you might figure it out, but it is Crescent City. I don't know. You have the right to yell at me. It's fine. Because I was kind of leaning towards new adult for this because she curses more than I speak. Apparently the nuances here, lots of YA themes. So there are some classifications that state that this is a YA read. And if I were to compare this to A Court of Thorns and Roses, as well as From Blood and Ash, this just completely throws them out. And it's so funny because I heard a lot of mixed reviews about this because the first 200 pages or so is all world building. And it was very difficult for me to push through. I was about to drop it, and the only reason I didn't, I was like, listen, SJM, I love this author. Let me give her a shot. So I pushed through the first 100, 200 pages where, my God, I was more confused than anyone. But then things slowly started making sense, and then things were picking up, and then Hunt came into play. But in all seriousness, this was a very well-written book. I'm not even gonna talk about this. This is not allowed in my house anymore. I literally filmed a reaction video to the last like 15 pages of the book, which you can find up here. I thought I was going to die, okay? No book ever in the history of all books I ever read in any lifetime made me react the way I reacted with this book. The ending, I was gonna throw up. Like I felt, like I truly physically felt like I was gonna throw up. I was so overwhelmed. I can't even begin to explain it. As soon as I just hear of the third book coming out, I'll be right there buying it, getting it from the library, doesn't matter, I'm there reading it. So that was the ranking of my top 20 favorite books and series of all time. Again, I grouped them together by their series and I wasn't ranking them by individual books, which I know influenced a lot of the spot. Do you guys agree with me in my rankings? Are there any that you're super upset at me for putting super low, or some that you're like, wait, why did you put it so high? I didn't like that at all. Leave a comment down below because I would love to hear your opinions. I would even love to hear your top 3 favorite reads of all time, because maybe I haven't read it yet and I want to read it and see, maybe it'll come into my top 5. Notice I said top 5 and not 3. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, because this is not the last time I'll be ranking these books. I will be ranking them individually, and I will hopefully be reading a lot more, so maybe some of those new reads that I'll have will be filling in and replacing some of these books. And on that note, happy reading.